thank you for joining this Talent Minders podcast. My name is Andrew Zach, principal consultant and founder, and I'm happy to have one of the HR professional's strongest leaders with me today. Grahame Gibson is a longtime HR business partner and executive, and he'll be sharing secrets to his international business HR partnering success, something I wish I could have experienced as a young HR professional. Stick around also to the end when Grahame will be sharing 10 recommendations for those starting out in HR that really want to add value to organizations and to the business and want to someday work as a valued senior HR leader, something we all aspire to do. So welcome, Grahame. Really appreciate you joining us today. Let's get started. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Fantastic. Well, maybe as a way to get started, Grahame, you could give us a brief introduction, including your career strategy. So, where did you start, and how did you proceed, and how did you get to the top?
Okay, yeah, by good fortune, I think, but I obviously did some of the right things along the way. But funnily enough, I started my career in banking. I joined Lloyd's Bank and was sponsored by them for a business degree, which is where when I hope right for me and wrong for them. But there you go. But they sponsored me for a sandwich degree, and I spent some time with them, and then went to Ealing Business School in West London. And fortunately, that business degree gave me the opportunity to visit a couple of other organisations. What was then the British Aircraft Corporation, which was a major sort of government supplier, which wasn't such an exciting period, I must say. And then the Quaker Oats in West London, which was where I got my first involvement in HR. And it was a time when industrial relations and unions were key to success. And that was something that I found really interesting to do. So at the end of my degree, I went back to the bank and said, "Hey, I'd really like to do HR." And they said, "Sorry, old boy, we want you to be a bank manager first." And there you go. So I went back into the business, but found very quickly that it was frustrating, and started applying for jobs. Not easy without a background. In those days, every job asked for 2 years' experience, and I clearly had none, or very little. But was successful in joining the Avon Rubber Company, which was my first bit of good fortune. I can pat myself on the back because it was a proper assessment centre that we did. So it was a serious recruitment exercise, and that gives you a bit of a flavour of what Avon Rubber are like. And remember, this is back in the late 1970s. We're talking now, and we used. I say we because I joined them in their training department in Melksham, which is where their head office is in Wiltshire. An organisation of 8,000 employees. Avon Tyres, most people will have heard of, but they make rubber products and inflatable boats, which I'll come to. And they used assessment centres for their graduates. It always took about 10 graduates a year from memory. And so they were a really well-advanced organisation in those days, and I was lucky to join them. Went in expressing my desire to get into what was in those days called personnel line personnel, line HR, and that was all accepted. They sent me to Portsmouth Polytechnic to do a residential 5 weeks, I think it was, at different times that on personnel at line HR. Really good, and I think I've mentioned to Andrew in the past that basically the message from that course was: you do your job well, you'll make yourself redundant because your managers will all be so well developed by you that they don't need you. Good 3 years initially in training, and then my opportunity came. The manager in South Wales left the inflatables, Avon Inflatables factory, was their sort of premium inflatable boats, which you've probably seen in lots of movies. And there is personnel manager, I think, was for that site.
So if so as you progressed in your career, I mean, clearly that business training was probably very helpful for you as a foundation. But
Absolutely.
as you climb forward, what did you look for? I mean, did you aspire to becoming an HR director? I mean, was that sort of your goal? And if that was sort of your goal, how did you build your career to achieve that?
The reality is that I've always, I guess, wanted to do the best job I could. Uh, and I've always kind of been low key, shall we say, in my ambition. I once had in one of the organisations we had, a consultant from outside who went into houses and things and said, you're not a particularly ambitious person, are you? I said, well, not really, but it just happened. I think people, yeah, I if something if something I was if I was unhappy with how an organisation was operating, then I would move on. And I also, from an early stage, tended to think, well, I can do that job better than he can, and he may be my boss, but I'm sure I can do that. So, shall we say, I had confidence that I could do a good job, not in a brash or arrogant way, but just felt I could do a job. Yeah, my training background, although I wouldn't have chosen it originally, I just needed to get into HR in those days. I actually found immensely valuable. I worked with a couple of guys who were very good in the training team. We did training reviews in those days for the whole organisation. I don't even know if people do them these days, but we had an industry training board. We spent a number of weeks each year producing what was originally a survey of training needs across the whole organisation of 8,000 people,
Wow.
which was great because it involved me visiting all the sites, which was
Mm,
also important. Um,
mm,
and later it became, I think, the upgrading became the company manpower review and training plan or something like that. That was the industry's, the rubber industry's training board.
mhm.
You had to do that, and you got
Mm,
certain benefits from doing so. So that was good. It gave me a good breadth. I got a wide knowledge of the organisation. As I say, I went into HR. I was told when I went to interview, for God's sake, don't say you want to, but you like working with people.
mhm, mm.
And funnily enough, my whole start because of the business background
Yeah.
was um, was very much making the business do better. As far as I was concerned, HR is about making the business succeed and do better. Um, and in fact, the funniest thing is that when I went in my first week at Avon, as part of my induction, I went down to the factory. We had a little head office training mansion, and about a mile away was the main Melksham factory for tyres and rubber goods and so on. And I met a guy called John Fitzgerald, who was the personnel officer down at the factory, and he said,
Mm.
"Oh, he said, you obviously didn't make that mistake about saying you want to work with people." He said, "Funnily enough," he said, "the longer I've worked with people, the more I hate them." Now, I'm not saying that's the secret of success, but it was an interesting concept. And let me just say that after I know what he means.
Oh
Some
my
people
God,
don't know.
that is funny. That's
So
funny.
great thing about it was, as I say, they did exactly what they promised. I had a nice broad experience, progressed in the training department, and then, as I say, the opportunity came up in South Wales. I'd taken every opportunity in those 3 years to get involved with the HR managers around the different sites. We had sites in Melksham, in Bradford on Avon, in Rugby, in Birmingham, and in where else did we go? Of course, in Llanelli in South Wales, which is where I ended up. And I visited all those sites for the training needs surveys and everything else. Got to really know to some degree, what was going on in each of them, and the things there. So that 3 years was great. And so when I arrived as the new personnel manager for Avon Inflatables, for 300 people based down in South Wales, I at least had some clue what I was doing. I also did my what is now CIPD Polytechnic.
A quick question. That CIPD, is that something you would recommend? I know that there are quite a few people that rely on certification almost over experience. I mean, it's assuming that the certification will buy a certain level of experience. How has CIPD helped you in your career?
I'd say it's helped me because it's given me, some good theoretical background, and
Mm.
even now gives a tremendous range of resources as a member that you can plug into on their website. So it gives you lots of good practice stuff and guidance for the new areas that you haven't yet come across or whatever. So that's good. Um, it isn't essential, but on balance, I would recommend it. Certainly, I had a young
Did you
lady
get
work
to
with
level
me.
5 or level 7? What level did you achieve?
I got again. We didn't do levels in those
Oh,
days.
okay,
But
okay.
basically, I became a full member
Hmm.
back in probably 1978 or something like that. I did the course at Bristol over a year or two and got to the highest level you could get to then. Uh, my last HR professional colleague in my last organisation, I encouraged her to do all that, and she indeed went all the way and ended up with an MSc in CIPD. And that clearly that gives you, when you're moving around organisations,
Mm.
a head start and some confidence in the organisation that you know your stuff in that regard,
Yeah.
that you have a
Mm.
certain level of intelligence and theoretical knowledge, and it gives you that practical stuff there, and it's good. You also meet other HR professionals in the learning and learn what other organisations do and get a different perspective. Because in my experience, I've been with about 7 or 8 organisations, each one very different in a number of ways, and uh, I think whatever you do in terms of asking questions, interview, you see things based on your experience, and you sometimes get based on how the hell can this be happening? I just don't believe this. So, expect some surprise on the way. But I would recommend CIPD, but it's not essential. I have a colleague, and we both went to the Evening Business School at the same time. He was a board guy, and actually went there not doing finance because I did the finance option because I worked for a bank. He did the HR option of the day, the people option, because he was in their HR department, and he's had a great career as well. And he's just retired too. And but he never did what was the IPM and CIPD, but was succeeded.
Yeah.
But I
Okay.
do think
Good.
if I was
Interesting.
starting out, I'd still do CIPD. It just
Good.
gives you a number of advantages.
It's a good baseline to have. It's a good baseline to
But I
have.
would also, when it really comes down to it, probably draw more on experience than the theoretical knowledge when it really came down to it. But
Cool.
that theoretical knowledge helps you gain that experience. It gives you ideas that help you contribute to the business. So I'll go for it.
Cool. So as you kept growing, you had CIPD, you had a business degree, you had it looked like a strong generalist background. What made you so attractive? Why did you keep getting these great jobs?
Well, sometimes I was attractive, sometimes I wasn't. But
Well,
I think it was great, and I really enjoyed my 2 years in South Wales
mm,
until we got to the stage. It was, I think, 82. So I'd had 3 years in training, 2 years as personnel manager, learning stuff. I was able to do some stuff with the business there, which I was pleased with. But then we had recession in the UK, luxury goods, and our boats were luxury goods, top market, end of the market boats. And so demand fell, and I think my last job was to make 80 of the 300 people redundant. Not something I was, over happy with. Prospects for the future were great, so my mild ambition made me look for something else, and I decided to move to the southeast because then, as now, the southeast is really where most of the jobs are in the UK. Certainly, most of the big organisations are well represented there. And again, I was fortunate enough to go and be interviewed at Glaxo at Ware, now part of GSK, to do for the factory there. Joined them as senior personnel officer, so I took a step down. I was no longer the head of HR, but now I'm looking at a side of 1,000 employees rather than 300, and willing to learn. I was surprised that actually, in HR terms, they weren't as good, they weren't as well run as Avon, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
it's interesting. I found that too. Some of these larger corporations don't have the same level of sophistication in their processes and even the systems than some of the smaller companies.
To be
Surprising.
honest, I think some of that may be related to
Even
profitability.
leadership, I would say, in the HR leadership side. Go ahead.
And I say that again from experience. Uh, Avon was a successful organisation, but margins were tight, and it had to be well run to
Mm,
survive. It was a bit player in a sense in a big tire market compared with the size of a Michelin or whatever. It focused. It was clever. It marketed itself in particular niches. People like Rolls Royce tires, specialist tires, rather than a general. Every guy in the street go and get
mm,
your
mm,
Michelin X or whatever it was in those
mm.
days. So they were well run. Glaxo had at that time Zantac was their beta blocker, or no, not their beta blocker, sorry, their anti-ulcer drug, and they'd done a great marketing job to take over what was SmithKline and French's Tagamet there, and basically beat SKNF there, and their profit margin was staggering. And my feeling is, when I look at the organisations I work for, some of them with big profit margins, because they make so much money, they can actually be run quite poorly
Mm,
and still make money.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, as I say, and I found that Johnson Controls, which is another organisation I had a successful time with and was impressed by, again, our margins were staggeringly small,
Mm,
but it was well run. You had to be good.
you had to be, yeah.
Stay in business.
Interesting. Now, in your experience, how was the role of HR different in those types of organizations as opposed to those that were
It was some of the
more
basic
wealthy?
stuff. I mean, when I went to Ware, we had unions. It was in those days, and basically HR didn't deal with them that well. They didn't communicate with them, etc., etc. Whereas that's been something very normal in
Mm,
Avon. And funnily enough, after about 6 months at Glaxo, I got a call from my boss to say he wouldn't be there on Monday when I got back. I think I had a long weekend away. He wouldn't be there because he'd actually had a discussion with somebody and he wasn't going to be staying there anymore.
my God.
So I then, for 6 months, I think, maybe longer, stood in as the site personnel manager
Hmm.
there, which I quite enjoyed because, of course, now I could do what I'd done in South Wales on a bigger scale. And I had a training function and 2 or 3 HR advisors and so on. I think about 10. Um, and I did start to talk to the union. In fact, that was an area that I really always enjoyed was industrial relations. And later, as the unions kind of disappeared from the organisations that I worked with, employee relations in general, and getting understanding the employees and so forth. And so I was able to bring those communication practices that I'd learned at Avon, and just good structure in terms of, we used to have regular, company meetings for the HR managers, so we all knew what other people were doing, could learn from each other, etc., etc. Um, One of my most recent organisations, I don't even know who the HR people are in most of the countries, and that's just useless, really. You've got to communicate and be informed and have a good structure that keeps you informed, that helps you do your job rather than leaves you isolated. So that was what was good there. But having said that, Glaxo was still at the good end of the organisation. I thoroughly enjoyed my time in Ware. We did a lot of good stuff. Again, one of the things that was remarked upon there, I became really good friends with the production manager, and he, in the early days, said, we've not seen somebody like you on the shop floor before. And it wasn't so easy to get shop floor there because it's clearly in the pharmaceutical
Yeah.
environment, you can't just wander around.
Well, I think you raised a really interesting point. This notion about being on the floor, being close to the business. How have you? I mean, I know you worked in different industries, but how would you characterize how you developed relationships with the business? How did you keep yourself informed,
Okay.
understanding of the business?
In in some organisations, it was easy. Uh, A, I started with interest in the background, and B, I was on the senior management team. So, you know, we had meetings every month at least and knew
Mm,
what was going on. Um, in fact, weekly, depending on the site or the organisations. So that's great. So I'd certainly encourage anybody who's, as they at the more senior levels of HR, if they're joining a new organisation, to try and join an organisation where they can see that HR is properly represented at the most senior level. So that was easy. Elsewhere, I just made myself interested. My last organisation didn't have HR on the senior management team, um, and it was a real struggle to get there. And also there, I was under resourced, so I didn't have the freedom to impose myself as much as I'd like to on the senior management team and spend time saying, "Hey, why don't you do this? How do you do that?" Because we were too busy sacking people and doing all that kind of stuff that's all part of the fun of HR.
yeah.
But I still would have uh, a visit to the factory at every available opportunity. I mean, it was easy in the sense that I could just walk downstairs in the last organisation,
Mm.
and I could look out the window from my floor and see what was going on the shop floor. But the employees and the supervisors and managers appreciated being out there, and it's really good. And then because you can see what's going on, in that organisation, I laughed because when I got there, that they had clocking in and out, and they actually had this practice which had developed over some years where they would finish, let's say, at 5 o'clock, and at 10 to 5, there's a queue from the clocking machine. How can you let this be happening? It just, and I say it didn't matter because again the
Oh, that's
margins
funny.
seemed so
That's
major, so good.
funny.
Uh,
Well, I think that's one of the challenges, right? Particularly when you're in these smaller organizations where your resources are not, extensive,
yeah,
and you don't have the technology. How do you find that balance? Right? To be informed about the business, to understand the business, to have the relationships, with the business, and yet get all the HR stuff done. Because at the end of the day, even in those environments, you have to be a value-added HR business
yeah,
partner, and you cannot be one if you don't have that business understanding. So, yeah, even if it's harder, more challenging, you still need to
yeah,
be creative, right? And maintain that a certain level of insight about the business.
yeah, yeah. I say the interest has always been there because of the business background, and I don't believe you can provide a good service to a business you don't understand. It's as simple as that.
Simple as that. Yeah, no, it's good. It's good.
And yeah, that you can always get out there. You can always get onto the shop floor. You can, and okay, you may work in an HR environment which is spread around the world. Around the world or the country. When I was at Johnson Controls for the UK, we had offices because of the nature of the business in Birmingham, in the West Country, in Scotland, etc. So I think I did something like 35, yeah, about 35,000 miles a year in my car. Now I had a decent commute as well, but I've never done that like that because I would visit
Well,
branches.
no wonder that was the green Maserati, I believe they used to used to race around the UK with. Yeah, I'll go there. I'll go
They
there.
didn't, they, they didn't stretch it. They didn't stretch the Maserati, but
Urgent meeting in Edinburgh.
I did have a bright red BMW. It was great.
But Graham, that's a very important point, and there's a lot of the complaints from the business seems to still be that you guys don't understand my business. So I mean, any tips that I know we're jumping around a little bit, but any tips that
Yeah,
what's not happening? Because what you're saying, the guys and girls will say, of course, naturally, but we're not doing it, or at least it's not consistent to the point where we feel confident to challenge the business or to be proactive about coming up with new solutions, mainly because we're just always reactive about the business. We're behind the curve. We don't have a lot of the answers because we don't have a lot of the knowledge about the business.
Yeah.
So, what can we
You
do
know, just
differently?
simple getting knowledge about the business, the kind of things. Yeah, as I say, in my last organisation, I wasn't privy to the monthly directors' meetings and so forth. Um, but that didn't stop me going and talking to the individual directors or whatever about their part of the business and what was happening there and so forth. You can always, find managers at different levels or the directors usually as well, or the most senior people in there, and basically go and talk to them and ask them questions about how their function's operating
Mm.
and how you can help them. Is there anything you could do to help them? It's just really engaging with them doing that. That's been easier in some organisations than others. I mean, at Glaxo and so on, I had the time. I had a team doing the day-to-day stuff. I had the time to go and do that kind of thing. It even there was me and a secretary, but I still was able to get out there on the shop floor and talk to the leaders there and help them solve their problems.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it sounds like it's almost like you put on wearing that strategic partnering hat. You carve out time in your schedule to
yeah,
make sure that there's time every so often, every period of time, to be out in the business, because otherwise, right, you're always dealing with fires,
yeah,
and it's easy to say I've just been too busy to get out there. So you've got to be proactive, build it into your schedule so that it
yeah,
becomes a part of your business life. So I'd like to
yeah,
just transition, Graham, if we could, or you can dip back
yeah.
if you want on the career. Very interesting, but this plays into that in terms of, when you got to the top of HR, and you were there for quite some time. You and I worked together um, at Boston Scientific, one of the best companies on the planet. I believe we had a great time. I was working in the headquarters in Paris. You were based out of the UK. I think that was St Albans, right?
Spain, St Albans looked after the UK and the Nordic countries
Right.
for a
So,
while.
so in
Yeah,
these leadership positions, give us a sense of what were your key responsibilities, and in particular, I'm curious to know how you partnered with the business to drive performance, because I know you were on these leadership teams, and I know you were very influential. I mean, a lot of these guys and girls wouldn't move without you. So, so what were sort of your key responsibilities as a senior leader? How did you spend your time? And then
okay, at Boston.
B specifically, how did you partner with the business to drive performance?
Okay, let's start at Boston. Now, Boston was a structure I wasn't over impressed with when I went there. I mean, we I went in because of my experience and previous experience with big organisations, and I actually joined them because I'd been made redundant after Glaxo took over Wellcome. Now, funnily enough, I moved from Glaxo to a Belgian company called Eternit, making roofing materials. A big organisation, funnily enough, 30,000 odd employees worldwide there. In the UK, I had about 1,000 I was looking after. Went back into pharmaceuticals with the Wellcome Foundation, and after being there for about 3 or 4 years, Glaxo took them over, and I worked in the head office in London. Glaxo already had, from my count, about 2 or 3 head offices in different parts of London, and so after a year we were closed and I was redundant. And I happened to be approached by a headhunter for the Boston job at that time, so strolled straight into that. It was a sales and marketing operation with a number of different um, mainly sales in terms of the numbers of people there. A number of sales teams geared at different parts of the medical profession, shall we say, or different things, oncology or endoscopy or whatever. And they all worked in a little world of their own and so forth. And so when I got to St Albans, I observed that. We tried with other members of the team in Northern Europe and Southern Europe and so on to bring in with HR procedures and practices, because it was new early days, I think, for HR in the organisation in Europe there. But also in practical business terms, I said, well, there was no leader in the UK. There were something like 6 different senior salespeople,
Yeah.
all paying their people different rates and things like this, and answering to some guy in Paris and saying, hey, I don't care what he's doing because my boss is in Paris. And I was at least able to introduce a regular monthly meeting for all those guys, chaired by me and with the finance guy in there as well, so that we all at least knew what the others were doing, or at least they in particular in the sales function knew that they were both going to be visiting the same hospital on the same day, 10 minutes apart or something, and the hospital would say, hey, you're from Boston, I just the rest of
Well,
them.
this, but this was your initiative, right? To bring these
Yeah,
guys together. Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
So my view was to bring that, and then they found that they could maybe get together and offer some
Align
kind
the
of
leadership. What a
yeah,
radical idea.
yeah. And in fact, my one of the things that was even though I moved on. Funnily enough, a former senior guy in in HR the guy who recruited me, Arthur Buck, had moved on from there to Johnson Controls, and I left because he called me. He said, "Hey, I've got an HR director vacancy in Johnson Controls in the UK. Are you interested?" So that's why I moved on at that stage. But what I was pleased to see, which I regard as a little bit of a legacy, was they actually appointed a manager for the UK in
Yeah,
Johnson
country manager. Yeah.
country
Yeah, that's
manager.
right. That's right.
It's so important, it makes things so much better and coordinated and organised to have that
So tell me
manager.
when, in that type of capacity, because you're clearly more strategic. I mean, at that level, the organization is trying to move forward with a strategy. And sometimes, I mean, with all due respect, it's like a bunch of little kids. They're
Yeah,
all in their own little sweets corner and trying to play their own games. So,
yeah.
how would you describe your principal role and responsibilities at that level of HR?
That in that organisation, it was another function is organisation structure and organisation development. It was looking at the organisation. This organisation isn't working, so do that. So it was to apply the breadth of your knowledge to the organisation. As far as the organisation is concerned, we would deal with everything, discipline, recruitment, compensation, etc., training, and so forth. That was all kind of thing. But there was also this bigger, more strategic issue of, hey, quite apart from the day-to-day stuff, the organisation looks really hard. You've got all these people wandering up on their own, as you say, like a bunch of kids playing their own areas. It was clear that it needed to be brought together. So, and that, you know, um, is a bit of HR and a bit of just sound business sense, it seems to me. So I think just having that, realizing what's going on and determining to do something about it. It would have been easy to sit back and just do the transaction stuff, but it didn't sit well with me to be operating in that environment. So
Well, apart from bringing a sense of humor to the boardroom, which I'm sure you did, and I know you did actually, because I was a part of that.
yeah,
How did you influence? How did you establish this partnership where the guys and girls actually listened to you and made some fundamental changes to how they did business?
I guess I tried to identify the things that would benefit them as individuals within that structure, and it was
What's an example of that?
an example was, as I say, you could maybe get 2 or 3 different disciplines in the medical world together and say, hey, let's have a joint visit to XYZ hospital and their procurement team, and we can perhaps do a deal that will sell more for each of us if we get there together. We're a major. We can be a major supplier to them rather than just a bitty one that does a bit here and so forth. They have a plan. It's just to me, a more business-like approach. And from the customer, as I say, for a hospital saying, "What's that Saturday again?" We've seen 3 different guys from there this week. It would just so very obviously, if you want somebody to do something, by and large, you've got to show them that they're going to get something worthwhile out of it.
Cool,
Uh,
cool. Well,
you know,
speaking of that, I know this is a bit tough to think about because I'm sure there are many. But could you give us one or two which you would consider key accomplishments that enabled heightened business performance and success? A couple of really big moments that made a huge difference to a business.
Okay. So
And how did you
one,
do that?
yeah, one of them was Johnson Controls. Now, and you know, one of the things that I say as you go along, obviously you learn about things you experience and so forth. And when I went to Johnson Controls, first time as HR director, so and I was really lucky again because I had an MD who was a real supporter of HR and felt HR could really help his business.
Mm.
Now, it particularly could do so because uh, that was a business that really grew by acquiring new contracts. It was, as I say, an engineering services business. So Johnson Controls looked after the boilers and ventilation systems and all sorts of other technical engineering matters for major organisations. Funnily enough, I found myself visiting GlaxoSmithKline at
Huh.
Harlow, Merck and Dome, and various others there as customers. Reckitt Benckies are up in Hull, um, because we supplied teams resident on their site
Mm.
who looked after their equipment. We also had travelling engineers and so on, but we had several hundred employees on different sites. There were over 100, I think, at Glaxo, at Harlow, GSK Harlow, and so on. So teams of anything from 25 to 100 people on different sites. And one of the things that there were two things really that we made a big strategic input there and helped the business. One was that uh, the MD was Patrick Bateman, his name was really concerned that we've got all these teams on different sites. Some of them who'd perhaps been employed by that host company originally had transferred to us or to another organisation, and we'd then won the contract from them under the TUPE regulations. But still, basically, they saw themselves as a GSK or a Reckitt Benckiser employee, and Patrick felt that he wanted them to recognise that they were part of our business and our employees, and they should be delighted to be sharing in our success and so on. Now, when I was in Glaxo back in mid '80s, they introduced a thing across the group, certainly across the operations, the factory sites, called team briefing. Now, we all talk about team briefing, and we mean different things, I think, very often. We had team briefing in our last organisation, but it was unrecognisable compared to what we introduced at Glaxo. And there was an organisation used to be called the Industrial Society, and they were very inspirational and very thorough in the way they did team briefing. So basically, it was sold by the head of that organisation, a chap called John Garnett, and they had a great video about winning the hearts and minds of your people, and that's something that still rings true with me today. I can still see the video in my mind now. It was brilliant. But what happened was we didn't just go and talk to the people every week or show them a slideshow or whatever it might be, or as we do nowadays. Basically, from the top of the organisation down to the bottom, briefings took place, and they were geared at the final level of briefing at a particular time on the same day every month for half an hour. So the factory stopped for half an hour while supervisors told their teams of maybe 5 to 10 people, no more than that, a number of things each time, and gave them. So they talked for 20 minutes, and they gave 10 minutes of feedback and questions and so on, with an undertaking that anything the supervisor could answer would be answered within 24 hours by senior level. And basically, it's a very structured thing. The senior management team would meet. They'd send down 3 messages to each of the functions. Then the head of that function, production, would go down to his team leaders, his section heads and so on, and say, okay, guys, this is what we're sending down from the MD or the factory manager. I want you to pass that on to your guys and add 3 things of your own. But what's production done this month, or what are we doing next month, or whatever. Then it would go down to the next level. We would add 3, and not too many levels, otherwise you'd get ridiculous. But then finally to the supervisor, who would add, in our team last week, we made more tablets than we've ever made before, or whatever it might have been. And that happened religiously every month. And even more important, we trained every supervisor in the organisation to deliver those briefings. So that was good. So, and the union in those days said, it's our job to tell that. And again, this is where HR has to be strong and say, no, it isn't. It's management's job to tell the guys that you have your function, we have ours, and it's management right there. And actually, the feedback from the employees afterwards was, and even the unions, etc., hey, this is great. We're really understanding what's going on in the organisation now. We're getting much more communication. Got it back, and that was good. So that went down really well, and that had been,
that's cool.
I don't know, 50 years earlier, maybe. And I went to Johnson Controls, and Patrick said, how do we get these people understanding that work at Johnson Controls? I said, hey, let's try team briefing. That's something that you can issue down to your branch managers and your site managers, and they can then add their things. And then we got in somebody to train the supervisors, etc., and we did that. And he was really, really impressed with that, and felt that we brought the organisation together again to provide a better service to our customers, appreciating what we as an organisation were achieving.
That's
and
awesome.
There, that was nice to be able to contribute. The other key thing there was, because of the nature of the business, HR had an even more direct role, because we grew the business by bidding for new contracts. So in doing that, Patrick involved HR, because typically the host company would say, hey, we've got this group of employees, they work for XYZ Limited, and they've worked there 5 years. You're going to take them over, they'll be worried to death about, what's this going to mean for me? I know what happened when we moved to XYZ, and some of these organisations were not that professional, shall we say, in the way they treated their people. And Patrick would invite me along. We'd talk with the senior management team in the different countries that were involved in that, or that area, basically demonstrating to them that we were a responsible employer with integrity, that we'd look after the people there, and they needn't worry about disgruntled employees, because we always treated our people properly, etc., etc. And we'd even go and give sessions to the groups of employees, something I was happy to do, and sit down so they could ask questions directly, and again get some feeling for what's going to happen to their terms and conditions, etc., etc. How does this company operate? And again, it's down to your credibility and your confidence in your abilities to deal with people in those kind of issues. So when I was there, we moved from we had 900 employees, I think it was, when I went there. We had 1,400 when I left. So we had a real significant growth in there, and HR certainly contributed to that. Made the people selling those contracts, to new suppliers, confident that they were doing the right thing.
For me, and if I was new out there, I would want to hear about from you.
Yeah.
What are the 10 things? So let's just go from the top. Number 10 things you would recommend to those starting out in the HR profession. Okay, I'm new. Maybe I'm new on your team and you're coaching. What are the 10 things that I have to do to one day become great? Okay. What is number 10? Number 10.
Number 10. Well, not necessarily in order. Okay. Let's start with number 10, which would be, just be thorough in everything you do. Okay. Make sure that you really make sure things are right, because good old HR and read Ulrich, but the right bit of Ulrich's original four things about business partnering. And one of the first one, the fundamental thing that you've got to do just to be credible in the organisation is be the administrative expert. So make sure you're thorough in doing everything, and you're not sending out letters with wrong names, or salaries that are incorrect, etc., etc.
Okay,
Because
so
HR, everything we do wrong actually impacts on somebody, and they don't like it.
they don't. Yeah.
So
Good
let's get it
advice.
right.
Okay,
And
what's number 9?
number
Number
nine,
9.
again, is let me just think. I made myself a little note there. Try and keep up with developments in the profession. So CIPD makes that fairly easy for you, because there's lots of resources there, so that when you're dealing with things, particularly as you become more senior, you can bring things to the table, to the senior management team, that they won't necessarily have heard of before. So
Cool.
keep in touch with what's going on and what's new.
Great.
Probably
Okay.
the next one,
Number
and
8.
linked with that, is draw on all your experience. As I say, I don't see myself as a great creator. I don't come up with staggering new concepts and theories and things, but I know what I've used and what works. And if I can see something that looks good, and I've applied it and it worked, or it would have worked with some modifications, then draw on that. Again, the same thing may not work exactly the same in different organisations. You've got to be bright enough to make the modifications so it will fit. But draw on that experience.
Okay, cool. Number 7.
7.
Great insights.
Okay. Okay. So I said learn from experiences and everything else there. Let me just think. It doesn't matter that much. Integrity. Do everything you do with integrity. Okay. You need to, and you need to really gain respect of others, and that's not only the directors and the MD and everything else, but all the managers and the employees. If you deal with people with respect and with integrity, then you'll gain respect, and that'll make your job an awful lot easier. People will be open to you then, and they'll go along with the things that you suggest a lot more readily, if they have that respect for you and know that they can trust you. So that's important.
Super. Number 6.
Obviously,
Graham.
one of the things that I've been keen on is know the business. Do everything you can to find out about the business, even if there are obstacles in the way. Just go and talk to people. Go and have a look. You can find even information online if you need to, but hopefully you can just talk to people in the organisation, and what's the business trying to do? What's it achieved? What can you see the weaknesses? What do other people think of the weaknesses? What would they like to see put right in the business? So get to know the business.
Cool.
If you're going to do things with managers, and whether you're an HR advisor who's just providing a service to the sales function or the finance department, build that relationship with the senior guy in there, because you need his support to introduce changes, or help there, or even to get the things done day to day and to take the advice. So do that. Try and another one would be, try and get wider experience rather than in just one function. As I say, if you're
good advice.
if you're in a generalist role, try and have a look at what's going on in learning and development. Look at compensation, etc. Some organisations, their employment law is specialised. For me, I've always been very keen on knowledge of employment law. It's one of my strengths, I think. It's something that's happening, certainly in my last job. It was absolutely critical, probably saved the company tens of thousands of pounds. I should have to say that in that organisation, we had disciplinary cases on a factor of about 100 to any other organisation I've ever worked in. It was unbelievable, and that was fundamental because managers didn't manage.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So another point would be
number 3.
Help your managers to manage. Make sure they do, because you're always up against it. Because what I said to my young lady in my team in the last campaign was, when I was at Glaxo with 1,100 employees, I would see an employee once in a blue moon, Not other than when I went out to look for them. And I think I did 2 disciplinary cases in 4 or 5 years with an organisation that big.
Wow, that's incredible.
We would do that in a month. We would do that in a month. And I'm not even joking. So employment law knowledge,
Yeah,
doing things properly
good.
and probably is great. It
That's
saved a
cool.
lot of money and a lot of time to the last organisation. So that's
Okay,
good.
cool. Number two.
Let's see. So that's it. Uh, uh, and as I said earlier, get out there, get out with all the people. You know, meet the managers, meet the directors, build the relationships, and build relationships with the employees. Go out there. The fact that the HR manager or advisor gets out on the shop floor and sees what they're doing, most people have at least a little bit of pride in what they're doing.
Hmm.
You can help them have even more pride in the organisation, in them, if you communicate well. But get out there, because they like to see that people are interested in what they're doing, and you'll gain immense credibility by being seen out there and having some idea of what's going on. But that you take the trouble to do that. That will be recommended. How are we
Cool.
doing? How many have I done?
Number one more, Graham. One
One
more.
more. Build relationship integrity.
Reach into that wealth of experience.
Yeah, that's it. I got so much of it. Oh yeah, and the good old one that, again, going back to my friend Ulrich, who, as I say, I really valued his work when I first came across it, because I thought it really did sum up those 4 points. What HR is all about. Be brave enough to be the employee champion.
Mm.
When the senior management team or somebody or the organisation is trying to do something that you know is really going to cause issues with employees, challenge. Should we be prepared to create those issues? Because what we need to do is important. If there is a line of employees waiting 10 minutes before the clock goes, then you really should be strong enough to say, hey, this isn't right. We need to do something about it. But if there is a genuine issue that you feel is going to cause problems with employees, and genuinely so, then go back to management and say, hey, you're creating an awful lot of trouble with yourself with this. Stand up for those employees. Again, it's something that is valued, and again builds that respect. You can, if people go with you, it's an awful lot easier than having to beat them up, beat around to get there. And like
Great
I said
lessons.
earlier, if you can win the hearts and minds of your people, then you can do anything. If you're always an adversary, then it's going to be a real hard work, and you're never going to get the full results that you should achieve. Okay.
Well, Graham, I tell you, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you. I want to thank you for sharing, what I consider to be, I've seen it firsthand, great wisdom and experience. And I'm sure everyone else is really enjoyed what you presented today. No doubt you'll be helping many out there in the HR field to move closer to the business and add greater value in these changing, challenging times.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining us. Tune in next time for another Talent Minders podcast where we will challenge you on the HR environment. Take care. Have a great day.